My stomach dropped like a stone when I heard the voice on the other end of the phone. Is this Loren Carranza? This is Ezra from Hillcrest Estate Jewelry. I believe we have something that belongs to you. My hands started shaking as I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? A vintage Omega Seamaster, 1967. Gold case, navy face. There's an engraving on the back that says, "To my son Dante with all my love, Papa." My blood boiled. That was my father's watch, the only thing he'd left me when he died 2 years ago. I yanked open my bedroom dresser drawer where I kept it wrapped in tissue paper inside its original box. Empty. Where did you get it? I asked, though I already suspected. Young man brought it in yesterday morning. Tall, maybe 28, said his name was Troy Ashworth. Claimed it was from his grandfather's estate. Troy. My stepmother's son from her first marriage. The entitled brat who'd moved into our family home 6 months after Dad's funeral, acting like he was doing us a favor by acknowledging my existence. He said it was his grandfather's? That's what he claimed. But when I asked about the inscription, he got nervous. Started making up stories about how maybe Dante was his grandfather's middle name or something. They had no idea that the grieving son they just robbed was about to become their worst nightmare. Hey friend, if you love real gripping stories where justice hits hard and betrayal never goes unpunished, please subscribe. 1 second for you, big deal for me. That watch was the only thing my father left me when he died. My father, Dante Carranza, was a man who believed actions spoke louder than words. He worked construction for 38 years, building houses and commercial projects across Phoenix with hands that stayed rough no matter how much lotion my mother rubbed into them at night. He wasn't wealthy by any stretch, but he had something more valuable than money: integrity. Every job he took he finished. Every promise he made he kept. And the only expensive thing he ever owned was that Omega Seamaster he'd bought himself for his 40th birthday after landing his biggest contract ever. Someday this will be yours, Mijo, he'd tell me, letting 8-year-old me hold the watch and feel its weight. But not because it's expensive. Because it represents something. It represents a man who worked for what he had and never took shortcuts. When cancer took him at 61, I thought I understood grief. I thought I understood loss. What I didn't understand was how quickly everything I thought I knew about family could change. The funeral was barely over when Vanessa Ashworth appeared at our door. She was 43, blonde, with the kind of forced smile that never reached her eyes. She'd known Dad for exactly 4 months. They'd met at a grief support group after her second husband died, but somehow she'd convinced him to marry her just 6 weeks before his diagnosis. "I'm here to help you through this difficult time," she'd said, already sizing up our modest living room like she was calculating its resale value. Mom was destroyed by Dad's death, barely functional, so when Vanessa offered to handle the arrangements, nobody questioned it. She moved in 2 weeks later, bringing her son Troy with her like a package deal. Troy Ashworth was everything I wasn't: trust fund baby, college dropout, full-time disappointment who'd never held a job longer than 3 months. At 28 he was 3 years older than me but acted like a spoiled teenager, complete with expensive sneakers and an attitude that suggested the world owed him something. "Don't worry, little bro," he'd said on his first day in our house, sprawling across Dad's favorite chair like he owned it. "I'll teach you how to live a little. Maybe get you some style, help you figure out what you want to do with your life." What I wanted to do with my life was honor my father's memory. I worked as a project manager for a residential construction company, following in Dad's footsteps but with the business education he'd never had the chance to get. Every day I wore his watch, feeling its familiar weight on my wrist, remembering his lessons about hard work and honesty. Vanessa and Troy had different ideas about honoring Dad's memory. Within a month they'd started updating the house. New furniture, new paint, new everything that erased any trace of the man who'd built our family with his own hands. "Your father had such simple tastes," Vanessa would say, watching the charity truck haul away Dad's workbench and tool collection. "It's time to bring this house into the modern era." Mom went along with everything, too grief-stricken to fight. I tried to speak up, tried to preserve some of Dad's belongings, but I was outnumbered and overwhelmed by their relentless campaign to make the house their own. The one thing I managed to protect was the watch. Every morning I'd put it on, every night I'd carefully place it back in its box in my dresser drawer. It was my connection to Dad, my reminder of who I was supposed to become. Until the morning I got Ezra's phone call and discovered it was gone. I drove to Hillcrest Estate Jewelry in a rage, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The shop was in an upscale part of Scottsdale, the kind of place that specialized in authentic vintage pieces and estate sales. Ezra turned out to be a dignified older man with careful eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades authenticating valuable items. "Your stepbrother's story didn't add up," he said, leading me to his office. The inscription was clearly personal, and he couldn't explain the significance. Plus, he seemed desperate to sell it quickly, which is always a red flag. The watch sat in a plastic evidence bag on his desk, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I remembered. But it was definitely Dad's. The same nick on the bezel from when he'd caught it on a piece of rebar, the same worn spots on the band from years of daily wear. "What did he tell you about needing the money?" "Said he had a business opportunity. Some kind of import venture that required quick capital." Ezra shook his head. "In 30 years of doing this, I've learned to recognize when someone's selling something they have no right to sell." "How much was he asking?" $2,400 cash. Far below its actual value, which should have been another warning sign. I stared at the watch through the plastic, feeling a mix of rage and heartbreak. $2,400. Troy had sold the most precious thing my father owned for less than half its worth to fund whatever scheme he was pursuing this week. "What happens now?" "You'll need to file a police report. With the inscription and your documentation of ownership, you should be able to recover it. But you'll need proof that it was stolen rather than given." I pulled out my phone and showed Ezra a photo of Dad wearing the watch just weeks before he died, along with pictures of his will specifically mentioning that it should go to me. "This should be sufficient," Ezra said, examining the documents. "But I have to warn you, family theft cases can get complicated. If your stepbrother claims it was given to him or that he had permission." "He didn't." "Then you'll need to prove it. And you'll need to be prepared for this to get ugly." I drove home with the police report in my passenger seat, planning exactly what I was going to say to Troy and Vanessa. But when I walked into the house, I found them waiting for me with expressions that made it clear they already knew why I was there. "Loren," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We need to talk." I found them in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Dad used to make breakfast every Sunday morning, now completely remodeled with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that erased every trace of his presence. Troy was leaning against the island, arms crossed, wearing a defensive expression that told me he'd been rehearsing his justification. Vanessa stood beside him with that calculated look she always got when she was about to manipulate someone. "Before you say anything," she began, "I want you to know that Troy feels terrible about the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I set the police report on the counter between us. "He stole my father's watch and sold it to a pawn shop." "I didn't steal anything," Troy said quickly. "Mom told me I could sell some of the old jewelry to help fund my import business." "Your mother told you that?" Vanessa's smile was razor thin. "Your father left several pieces of jewelry, Loren. I assumed you wouldn't mind if Troy borrowed one to help launch his career. That watch was specifically left to me in Dad's will." "Was it?" She tilted her head like she was trying to remember. "I recall him mentioning that all his possessions should go to benefit the family as a whole." I pulled out my copy of Dad's will and read directly from it. "To my son Loren, I leave my Omega Seamaster watch, worn daily as a reminder of the values I tried to instill: hard work, honesty, and the understanding that anything worth having must be earned." The silence that followed was deafening. Troy looked uncomfortable, but Vanessa's expression didn't change. "Well," she said finally, "that's certainly one interpretation. But your father also told me many times that he wanted Troy to have opportunities to succeed. He specifically said that family should help family." "By stealing?" "By investing in each other's futures." Her voice took on that patronizing tone she used whenever she wanted to make me feel like a naive child. "Troy's import business could be worth millions. Your father would have wanted to be part of that success. My father wanted me to have his watch." Troy finally spoke up. "Look, little bro, I get that you're sentimental about it. But it was just sitting in your drawer doing nothing. At least this way it's working toward something bigger." "Working toward what?" "Another one of your failed business ventures." His face flushed. "This is different. I've got real connections this time, real products. I just needed startup capital to get the first shipment ordered." "What kind of products?" "Artisanal home goods from Southeast Asia. Handcrafted, sustainable, targeted at the conscious consumer market." I stared at him. "You sold my father's watch to import decorative bowls?" "It's more sophisticated than that." "It doesn't matter what it's for," I interrupted. "You stole something that wasn't yours and sold it without permission." Vanessa stepped between us. "Loren, I understand you're upset. But legally speaking, as your father's widow, I have certain rights to distribute marital assets as I see fit." The watch wasn't a marital asset. It was his personal property, specifically bequeathed to me. That's debatable. And even if it wasn't, Troy acted in good faith based on my authorization. I looked back and forth between them, realizing this had been planned. They'd waited until I was at work, gone through my personal belongings, taken the one thing that mattered most to me, and now they were trying to gaslight me into accepting it. You have 48 hours to return the $2,400 Troy got for it, I said. If you don't, I'm pressing charges. Troy laughed. With what money? I already invested it in the first shipment. Then you'd better figure out how to get it back. Vanessa's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Loren, I think you're forgetting something important. This is my house now. I've been very generous allowing you to continue living here after your father's death, but that generosity has limits. The threat was clear: back down or get kicked out. Fine, I said. But just so we're clear, I'm not backing down. And if you think you can intimidate me into dropping this, you don't know me very well. I walked out of the kitchen, grabbed my laptop and some clothes, and drove to my friend Mateo's apartment. He was one of the few people who'd known Dad well and understood what the watch meant to me. They really think they can just take it? He asked after I'd explained everything. They think I'm too weak to fight back. Too sentimental, too broke, too whatever to stand up to them. Mateo was quiet for a moment. You know your dad wouldn't have let this slide, right? What do you mean? I mean, your dad was the kind of guy who believed in justice. He always said that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. That night, lying on Mateo's couch, I thought about Dad's lessons on standing up for yourself and protecting what mattered. He'd always said that bullies only understood one language: consequences. It was time for Troy and Vanessa to learn that language. The next morning, I called the jewelry store to check on recovering the watch. Ezra had good news and bad news. Good news is I'm holding the watch as evidence and it won't be sold to anyone else. Bad news is your stepbrother's claiming he had permission to sell it, so this is going to require legal action to resolve. How long will that take? Depends on how hard they want to fight it. Could be weeks, could be months. I couldn't wait months. This wasn't just about recovering the watch. It was about making sure Troy and Vanessa understood that stealing from family had consequences. That afternoon, I paid a visit to the law offices of Rodriguez and Associates. The receptionist led me to a conference room where I spread out Dad's will, photos of the watch, and the police report. Attorney Carmen Rodriguez was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd handled several estate disputes for people in my situation. Family theft cases are always complicated, she said after reviewing my documents. But you have strong documentation here. The will is clear, the inheritance is specific, and the theft is well documented. What are my options? We can pursue criminal charges for theft, which would be handled by the prosecutor's office. We can also file civil suits for recovery of the property plus damages. But there's something else you should consider. What? She leaned forward. In my experience, people who steal from grieving family members usually aren't doing it for the first time. Has anything else gone missing since your father died? I thought about all of Dad's tools that had been donated to charity, his coin collection that had accidentally been thrown away, the savings bonds that Vanessa claimed she couldn't find. Actually, yes. Quite a few things. Then we need to do a comprehensive audit of your father's estate. Because if there's a pattern of theft, we can pursue much more serious charges. That evening I started making a list of everything that had disappeared since Dad died. By the time I finished, it covered 3 pages and represented thousands of dollars in stolen or misplaced property. But as I was going through Dad's papers looking for documentation of his assets, I found something that made my blood run cold. A safety deposit box key taped to the inside of his toolbox, along with a note that said, "For Loren in case something happens to me." Dad had been planning for something. And whatever he'd hidden in that safety deposit box, I had a feeling Troy and Vanessa had no idea it existed. The next morning, I took Dad's safety deposit box key to First Federal Bank, where he'd done his banking for over 20 years. The manager, Mrs. Gutierrez, remembered him well. Dante was one of our most reliable customers, she said as she led me to the vault. Always paid his bills on time, never caused any trouble. He opened this box about 6 months before he passed away. My hands shook as I turned the key. Inside the narrow metal box were documents I'd never seen before, some jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, and a thick envelope marked, "For my son Loren, to be opened only after my death." I sat in the private viewing room and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in Dad's careful handwriting, along with bank statements and legal documents that made my heart race. "Me Joe, The letter began, "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I hope my preparations were unnecessary. But I have learned to be cautious about the people who come into our lives when we are vulnerable." The letter went on to explain that Dad had become suspicious of Vanessa within weeks of their marriage. She'd asked too many questions about his assets, shown too much interest in his insurance policies, and made comments about how his simple lifestyle was wasting the potential of his accumulated wealth. "I moved most of my real savings to accounts she doesn't know about," the letter continued. "I also hired a private investigator to look into her background. What he found alarmed me greatly." Attached to the letter was a complete dossier on Vanessa Ashworth. She'd been married 3 times before, and all 3 husbands had died within 2 years of the marriage, 2 from heart attacks, 1 from a suspicious fall downstairs. Each time, she'd inherited substantial assets and quickly moved on to the next relationship. "She is not the grieving widow she pretended to be," Dad wrote. "She is a predator who targets older men with health problems and assets to inherit. I believe she married me because she knew I was sick and expected me to die soon." But the most shocking revelation was in the bank statements. Dad hadn't been the working-class man living paycheck to paycheck that I'd always believed. Over 38 years of careful saving and smart investments, he'd accumulated over $400,000 in various accounts. "This money is yours," the letter concluded. "Not hers, not Troy's, not anyone else's. I worked for every dollar and I wanted to give you the opportunities one never had. But be careful. If Vanessa discovers this exists, she will try to take it. She has done this before and she will do it again." At the bottom of the letter he'd written, "P.S. The watch has more secrets than just sentimental value. Look carefully." I drove back to Hillcrest Estate Jewelry in a daze, my mind reeling from everything I'd discovered. Ezra was surprised to see me back so soon. "Is there something specific you wanted to examine about the watch?" he asked. "My father left me a note saying it had secrets. Can you check if there are any hidden compartments or mechanisms?" Ezra's eyes lit up. "Actually, now that you mention it, there was something unusual about the case back. Let me take another look." He examined the watch under a magnifying glass, then used a small tool to probe around the edges of the case. After several minutes he found what he was looking for, a tiny catch that opened a hidden compartment behind the watch face. Inside was a folded piece of paper no bigger than a postage stamp, with a series of numbers written in Dad's handwriting, 4792816. "Safe combination?" Ezra suggested. "Maybe. But for what safe?" That afternoon, I searched every inch of our house while Vanessa and Troy were out. I found Dad's old safe in the basement, hidden behind some storage boxes. The combination worked perfectly. Inside were more documents that made my father's preparations even more clear. He'd been documenting Vanessa's behavior for months, recordings of conversations where she discussed his health and life expectancy, photos of her going through his papers when she thought he was sleeping, even evidence that she'd been researching his insurance policies and estate planning. But most damning were the financial records showing that she'd been slowly draining his checking account for household expenses, that were actually payments to Troy for his various failed business ventures. "She's been stealing from me for months," I said to Mateo that evening. "And Dad knew it. He was collecting evidence. What are you going to do with all this?" "I'm going to make sure they face consequences for everything they've done. Not just the watch, everything." The next morning I met with Carmen Rodriguez again and showed her all of Dad's hidden documentation. "This changes everything," she said, reviewing the private investigator's report. "If your father's suspicions are correct, we're not just looking at simple theft. We could be looking at elder abuse, fraud, potentially even—" She stopped herself before finishing the sentence, but I knew what she was thinking. 3 dead husbands with suspicious timing wasn't a coincidence. What's our next step? We file a comprehensive complaint with both criminal and civil components. Theft of the watch, fraud regarding the estate, elder financial abuse. And we request a full investigation into your father's death and Vanessa's previous marriages. Will that be enough? Carmen smiled grimly. "Loren, your father was a very smart man. He's given us everything we need to destroy them completely." That evening I got a call from Vanessa. Her voice was different, tight with barely controlled panic. "Loren, we need to talk. Can you come home? It's not my home anymore, remember? Please. It's important." I drove over to find both Vanessa and Troy waiting in the living room, looking like they'd been hit by a truck. Troy was pale and shaking, while Vanessa's usual composure had cracked completely. "We know you've been to the bank," Vanessa said without preamble. "We know you found his accounts." I didn't respond, just waited for them to show their hand. Look, Troy said desperately, maybe we can work something out. You want the watch back? Fine. You want the money I got for it? I can get it. Oh. I thought you already invested it. I can liquidate the inventory. Take a loss but get you the cash back. What about everything else you've stolen? Vanessa's eyes flashed. We haven't stolen anything. I'm his legal widow. I have rights to his assets. Not to the accounts you didn't know about. Not to the assets he specifically left to me. Those accounts should be part of the marital estate. Should they? Even the ones he opened after he found out what you really are. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Vanessa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want? I pulled out the legal documents Carmen had prepared. You're going to return everything you've stolen. You're going to leave this house. And you're going to face criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. And if we don't? Then the police are going to start investigating your previous marriages. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. Troy looked at his mother with growing horror, finally understanding the scope of what he'd gotten involved in. But Vanessa's expression hardened. You can't prove anything about my previous marriages. And you can't prove I married your father for his money. I smiled and pulled out my phone. Actually, I can. I played a recording Dad had made of Vanessa talking to someone on the phone about how the old man won't last much longer, and how she needed to speed up the timeline for accessing his assets. Her face went white. Where did you get that? My father was smarter than you gave him credit for. He knew exactly what you were, and he made sure I'd have everything I needed to stop you. That night, Vanessa Ashworth was arrested on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Troy was charged as an accessory after the fact for his role in selling stolen property. But as I watched them being led away in handcuffs, I realized this was just the beginning. Dad's investigation had uncovered evidence that would keep prosecutors busy for months. And I finally understood why he'd been so careful to prepare me for this fight. He'd known that someday I'd need to stand up not just for myself, but for his memory and for all the other victims Vanessa had left in her wake. The media picked up the story within a week. Widow accused of targeting dying husbands, read the headline in the Phoenix Herald, with Vanessa's photo prominently displayed alongside details of her previous marriages and the suspicious circumstances surrounding each husband's death. The police investigation expanded rapidly once other families came forward with similar stories. It turned out that Vanessa's pattern went back over 15 years and included at least 6 marriages to older men with significant assets who died shortly after changing their wills in her favor. I testified before a grand jury about Dad's preparations and the evidence he'd collected. The prosecutor, District Attorney Rebecca Fuentes, told me afterward that Dad's documentation was some of the most thorough she'd ever seen in a case like this. Your father built an airtight case, she said. Every conversation recorded, every financial transaction documented, every suspicious behavior cataloged. It's like he was conducting his own criminal investigation. Troy tried to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a lighter sentence, revealing details about his mother's methods and admitting that he'd known she was targeting Dad specifically because of his age and illness. She told me he wouldn't last long, he testified. She said we just had to be patient and supportive until nature took its course. Then everything would be ours. But according to his testimony, Vanessa had grown impatient with Dad's longer-than-expected survival and had started increasing his medication doses and encouraging him to rest more and avoid his regular medical appointments. She said the chemo was just prolonging his suffering, Troy admitted. She convinced him to stop treatment 2 months early, telling him he'd be more comfortable at home. The revelation that Vanessa may have hastened Dad's death sent me into a rage that took weeks to process. But it also strengthened the prosecution's case, adding charges of criminal negligence and potentially involuntary manslaughter. The civil trial moved parallel to the criminal proceedings. Carmen Rodriguez filed suits to recover all assets Vanessa had taken from Dad's estate, plus punitive damages for the emotional distress and financial harm caused by her fraud. The beauty of your father's preparation, Carmen explained, is that he documented not just what she stole, but what she planned to steal. We can seek recovery for the full value of everything she intended to take. The civil discovery process revealed the full scope of Vanessa's theft. Beyond the obvious items like the watch and Dad's tools, she'd been systematically draining his accounts through fake household expenses, unauthorized use of his credit cards, and forged checks made out to cash. Total theft, $127,000 over the 8 months of their marriage. But Dad's hidden accounts contained $420,000 that she'd never found, plus the house, which had been in his name only, and his life insurance policy, which specifically excluded any benefits to spouses married less than 2 years. Your father protected over $500,000 from her, Carmen told me. Money she was counting on having to fund her next target. The criminal trial began 6 months after Vanessa's arrest. I sat in the gallery every day, watching as prosecutors methodically destroyed her claims of innocence with Dad's evidence. Phone recordings where she discussed speeding up his decline. Bank records showing systematic theft. Testimony from her previous husband's families about identical patterns of behavior. The defense tried to paint her as a loving wife who'd been overwhelmed by caring for a dying man, but Dad's documentation was too thorough to overcome. Vanessa was convicted on all charges: elder abuse, fraud, theft, conspiracy, and criminal negligence in Dad's death. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison, noting that her predatory behavior toward vulnerable elderly men represents a particularly cruel form of exploitation. Troy received 3 years for his role as an accessory, though he was eligible for parole after 18 months with good behavior. More importantly for the other families involved, Vanessa was ordered to pay complete restitution to all victims. Over $2 million in stolen assets and damages across 15 years of fraud. The day after her sentencing, I drove to Hillcrest Estate Jewelry to finally reclaim Dad's watch. Ezra smiled when he saw me coming. "I've been waiting for this day," he said, handing over the watch in its original box. "Your father would be proud of how you fought for his memory." I slipped the watch onto my wrist, feeling its familiar weight and remembering Dad's final lesson. Sometimes justice doesn't come naturally. Sometimes you have to create it yourself. But there was one more thing I needed to do. With the civil settlements and recovered assets, I found myself in possession of nearly $600,000. More money than I'd ever imagined Dad had accumulated through his years of careful work and saving. My first instinct was to quit my job and live off the inheritance, but I kept hearing Dad's voice in my head: anything worth having must be earned. Instead, I used a portion of the money to start my own construction company, specializing in affordable housing for working families. I named it Dante Construction, with our motto taken from Dad's favorite saying, "Built to last." The first project was a small development of starter homes for young families, priced at cost rather than for maximum profit. Every house included a small plaque by the front door, built in memory of Dante Carranza, who believed everyone deserves a solid foundation. I kept Dad's watch with me every day, wearing it to job sites and client meetings as a reminder of the values he'd taught me. But more importantly, I kept his lesson about protecting what matters most. When potential investors approached with offers to expand quickly or cut construction costs, I remembered Dad's investigation into Vanessa's background and his warning about people who see opportunity rather than integrity. The business grew slowly but steadily, built on referrals from satisfied customers rather than aggressive marketing. Within 2 years, we were booked 6 months in advance and had earned a reputation for quality work at fair prices. I used more of the inheritance money to establish the Dante Carranza Foundation, which provided financial assistance to families dealing with elder abuse and estate theft. Carmen Rodriguez joined the board and helped us fund legal aid for victims who couldn't afford to fight back against predatory family members. "Your father's case has become a model for prosecutors," she told me at one of our foundation meetings. "The documentation standards he established are now taught in law schools as the gold standard for protecting elderly victims." But the most satisfying part of the foundation's work was helping other families recover stolen inheritances. We funded investigations, provided legal support, and created resources to help people recognize the warning signs of financial predators. 3 years after Dad's death, I received a call from a woman named Elena whose stepson had stolen her late husband's vintage car collection. Using the same investigative methods Dad had employed, we were able to help her recover the cars and expose the stepson's pattern of theft from other elderly relatives. "Your father saved my family," she told me at the trial where her stepson was convicted. "His example showed us how to fight back." I thought about that conversation often, how Dad's final act of protecting me had created a ripple effect that helped dozens of other families stand up to predators who preyed on grief and trust. The house where I'd grown up was eventually sold, with the proceeds going to the foundation. I couldn't live there anymore. Too many memories of Vanessa and Troy contaminating spaces where Dad and I had been happy. Instead, I bought a modest place in the same neighborhood where Dad had grown up, close to the construction sites where he'd learned his trade. Every morning I'd put on his watch, look at myself in the mirror, and ask, what would make him proud today? Usually the answer involved working hard, treating people fairly, and remembering that success meant more than just accumulating wealth. On the 5th anniversary of Dad's death, I visited his grave with flowers and a photo of our latest housing development. I told him about the families who'd moved into homes built by Dante Construction, about the victims we'd helped through the foundation, about Troy's early release from prison and his attempts to contact me. I blocked his number, I said to Dad's headstone. Some people deserve second chances, but some people just deserve consequences. As I was leaving the cemetery, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Troy. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. For everything. You were right about Mom and you were right to fight back. I hope someday you can forgive me. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and justice and the difference between the two. Finally, I typed back, I forgive you for being weak and stupid. I don't forgive you for stealing from a dying man. Stay away from my family. I deleted the message without sending it, then typed a different response. Apologies, don't return stolen time with my father. Live with what you did, but live better. That message I sent. 6 months later, I got an engagement ring resizing job from a young couple who wanted to use the bride's grandmother's diamond in a new setting. As I worked with the jeweler to preserve the old stone in a modern design, I thought about inheritance and legacy and the things that truly matter. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, keeping perfect time after all these years. Dad had been right, it wasn't valuable because of its price tag, but because of what it represented. Hard work, integrity, and the knowledge that some things are worth fighting for. As I handed the couple their restored ring, I realized that Dad's real legacy wasn't the money he'd saved or the evidence he'd collected. It was the lesson he'd taught me about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. 10 years have passed since I first got that phone call about Dad's stolen watch. Dante Construction now employs 43 people and has built over 300 homes. The foundation has helped recover more than $8 million in stolen assets for families across 12 states. Troy Ashworth works at a grocery store in Tucson and has never contacted me again. Vanessa died in federal prison 3 years ago, reportedly of a heart attack, an irony that wasn't lost on the families of her previous victims. I still wear Dad's watch every day, still feel its weight on my wrist as a reminder of the man who taught me that integrity isn't inherited, it's earned through daily choices to do the right thing. Last month, a young woman named Isabella came to our foundation offices. Her stepfather had stolen her mother's jewelry collection and sold it to fund his gambling addiction. She had the same desperate look I'd seen in my own mirror 10 years ago, someone who'd been betrayed by family and didn't know how to fight back. My mother died 6 months ago, she said, tears streaming down her face. She left me her wedding ring, her grandmother's pearls, everything that connected me to our family history. And he just took it all. I listened to her story, hearing echoes of my own experience in every detail. The same manipulation, the same justifications, the same assumption that grief would make her too weak to resist. What do you want to do about it? I asked. I want to get it back. All of it. And I want him to face consequences for what he did. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder containing the same types of forms Carmen Rodriguez had once used to help me. Then let's get started. As Isabella filled out the paperwork, I caught sight of my reflection in the office window. Dad's watch gleaming on my wrist, my construction company logo on the wall behind me, photos of happy families in their new homes covering my desk. This is what Dad had wanted when he planned his final lesson. Not just my recovery from Vanessa and Troy's betrayal, but the creation of something lasting that would help others fight similar battles. I thought about the inscription on the back of his watch, "To my son Dante with all my love, Papa." Dad had received it from his own father, who'd worked in the steel mills and saved every penny to buy something beautiful for his son. Now it was my turn to pass on the lesson. Not the watch itself, that would stay with me always, but the understanding that some things are worth fighting for, and that sometimes justice doesn't come naturally. Sometimes you have to create it yourself. I looked at Isabella, already planning her legal strategy, already mapping out how to recover what was rightfully hers. In her determination, I saw Dad's legacy continuing, spreading from one family to the next like ripples in a pond. "Are you ready for this to get difficult?" I asked her. "I'm ready," she said, and I believed her. Because that's what Dad had taught me in the end. Not that family would always be there for you, not that good things happen to good people, but that strength was something you built one choice at a time. And sometimes, the most important choice was deciding to fight back. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily forward, marking the seconds of a life lived in honor of a man who'd known exactly what he was worth, and had made sure his son knew it too. Have you ever experienced family members stealing from you during a time of grief? How do you protect precious memories of deceased loved ones from people who see only dollar signs? Share your stories in the comments below about standing up to family betrayal and honoring the legacy of those we've lost. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next chilling tale. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.